All right, guys, welcome back to the program. Today, my guest is Gerald Jules, and of course, if I'm wrong on that name, he definitely will tell you. I'm going to allow him to briefly introduce himself.
I work as a wealth manager. I manage a CBI development in True Blue in Grenada. I'm also a part of a think tank looking at socioeconomic policies, particularly looking at the CBI countries and looking at what's next as these CBI programs start to fail.
All right, so in this article, you said the Caribbean citizenship by investment CBI industry is under fire. You said the United States is quietly tightening the screws, revisiting concerns first raised under the Trump era travel bans that targeted countries with weak vetting standards. You said the European Union is going even further, actively petitioning to revoke Schengen visa access for CBI nations. This is not saber rattling. You said it's a real geopolitical process or pressure. Let's begin with the recent thing that we saw, the leaked memo which we saw from the Washington Post about Trump looking to add 36 countries. We saw St. Lucia, we saw St. Kitts, Antigua, I think Dominique as well. The U.S. State Department did confirm that when they had their press briefing. So let's talk about what implications are this for the CBI nations.
So sure, I mean, the first thing we're going to end up seeing is that nationals that have been able to go on holiday quite easily in the US or in the EU are going to be unable to do that now. And it's literally because of the pressure, I guess, that's been the industry's been faced with in the recent years. One being when Russia was closed down, we decided to put through a bunch of files for that too. And then the other thing is the amount of attention coming from the Islamist states as well, and using this as a vehicle to be able to move terrorism. I mean, that's the big fear, terrorism within to the US as well. And the other part of the problem had been the industry's got better for sure, but it was the money laundering as well, and that going through the US too and exposing us there. So I think on the whole, the industry just needs to tighten up. It just needs to get better.
You mentioned the issue of Islamic State.
Yeah, it's so Islamist states, pushing through candidates and also putting through money that's laundered as well into the system. So that's something that has, a potential flag. We don't know if the US has seen something like this because obviously they won't disclose it, but that's a real concern from their side.
Based on what you said, there is information that persons from these countries are getting passports from nations like
so I wouldn't say have, it would have been had in the past, of course. As you know, that the industry is about to get a new regulator through the ECCB, and that's so that the programs become more in line. Because I think typically what had happened is it was sort of a race to the bottom, and the EU had basically put out that they need to stop discounting the citizenships to make it less accessible. I think there's also another side of this as well, and that's that wealthy individuals from Europe and wealthy individuals from the EU are also using this program as well to avoid paying taxes within their local countries as well. And I also think that's part of why they're turning the heat on the program too, because they're starting to lose some of their tax revenue to these programs. And of course, we're on the other side not capturing it. And we saw that pressure happen to the UAE and its zones as well as it started to have to introduce income tax. So I'm sure in the future that might be part of the remedies to have income tax on foreign income in order to fall back in line with the Schengen visa, for example.
You mentioned that Caribbean governments are now pushing to establish a regional regulatory body this summer. You just mentioned that. But the question is whether this effort is a genuine reform or just damage control. Do you think it's too late what they're doing, the islands?
So I do. Sadly, I think it's too late. And I think that's also shown if you look at the performance of the industry. It's fallen down anyway. So I don't even know if government intervention is needed from the outside parties, because what the market tells you is there's a loss of confidence anyway, as we're starting to see application numbers dwindle. Also, I think it's dilution as well. We're looking at Argentina bringing on board a program too. Brazil has residencies programs as well. So I think it's just dilution in the market, and possibly we may not have the strongest product available.
So St. Vincent and the Grenadines is not involved in the CBI program, or
Sure.
CBI. The Prime Minister has always been advocating that it's a race to the bottom. It's something that is not sustainable. A program like this is basically scrapped based on the policies that the EU and the US are putting together. How bad of a wound would it place on these economies in the region?
So I'll give you a history. In Grenada, I know they had a similar program from 1997 to about 2001. I think the big difference here is post-COVID, what happened to our economies? And I think that's where the socio-economical part comes into it. So we're now dependent for about a third of GDP on average, these nations, from the CBI. And so you have to ask yourself, what has the government done with these funds? Have they tried to grow it? And you look at somewhere like Norway, when they discovered oil, for example, they put that into a fund. You have the Norway fund, and that's kicking back monies into the people. However, our politicians didn't know what to do with these funds. Sometimes they've squandered it, and a lot of times it's been sitting there and inflation's been eroding it. So I think right now we face a huge problem with the CBI. Is we're going to see a lot of countries having to borrow from the IMF just to sustain keeping the governments going. But there's also a bigger problem that we have, and that's to do with the countries and the assets themselves. We, as you know, don't operate, we don't have a wealth tax, we don't have income tax on foreign income, and we also don't have inheritance tax. And so what these foreigners have been able to do is to be able to buy the native lands, etc. And because there is none of these taxes in places, their ability to gain assets and to gain opportunities over us is exponential. And so we could really see a huge difference in a few years. The island I'm from, the population's going by 20%. We've gone from 100,000 recently to 120,000. And so, that's a fifth of a change in the voting membership as well. And so we're going to see the landscape and what we've loved and what we've treasured and the culture we've built. We're going to essentially see ourselves going into what is an economic slavery. We fought so hard to be freed. We fought so hard to get our freedom from the British, only to sell it. And that's the problem. So I think the programs need to change. We need to start having quotas. We need to view it like immigration, because ultimately that's what it is, although they're becoming citizens. We need to look at the people and saying how they help in the economy. And we need to make it so that it has a trickle-down effect for the average person as well.
Wow. I want you to take a listen to this from the press conference that was held in St. Vincent between the opposition leader of St. Vincent and Alan Chastanet out of St. Lucia. Listen to this and tell me what you make of it.
In part, the ban that's being proposed has a lot to do with CIP, particularly for the 4 countries in the Eastern Caribbean that were identified. And in a large part, it has to do with the lack of regulations and bad actors. It's been difficult for a lot of persons to really appreciate what the US's 2 major concerns are. One is money laundering. So the fact is that there has been proof that's been provided out there. St. Kitts has done it. Grenada has done it. That persons are underpaying the statute amount for the citizenship. And once you do that, it means that the monies of the programs are now all corrupted. And it becomes an AML issue because the monies are going through the correspondent banks in the US. 2, that we would have seen in recent times several high-profile criminals that have been arrested either in the UK, in Europe, or in the US, and they had secondary passports from OECS countries, Dominica and St. Kitts in particular. The US was hoping that the MOA that was signed and would have harmonized some of those issues, because in essence what's been happening has been a race to the bottom. In order to be able to get more sales, people are finding shortcuts around it. All these are our own making.
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, he said it just as it is. Only one thing I'll disagree with him, he said, is that he gave the idea that one spoils the whole bunch. I think, as he mentioned in the case of Grenada, what's important is that there will always be bad actors in, regardless of any industry that you're in. What it is we expect governments to be honest. We expect the institutions to flag these problems and to bring it forward to the authorities. And I think that's what the US is expecting. That's what the EU is expecting. What we don't expect is for our politicians to dumb things down, as we like to do in the Caribbean. We like to hide our problems, as you know. However, this doesn't work well on an international stage. And it requires us to move to a higher level. We've seen it as well with the BVD being cancelled right now on the FATCA system as well. Cayman had to get it right. We're just going to have to get it right there as well. And I think there's hope. There's definitely hope for the system, but it's going to slim down. It's going to be a niche program, and it's going to have to be with better vetted and more trustworthy countries that come on board and getting a second citizenship.
Seeing that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is not part of the CBI program,
No.
do you think at this moment, based on all the policy changes that are happening, whether in Europe, with the US, do you think it is wise for them to get in at this point in time?
So my honest answer to that would be no. I think we've seen in recent years that there are better ways, and through my research, I've also been looking at better ways, and some of those programs could be like Anguilla's residency by investment program, or we could start to look at SEZ zones when we're actually getting people to invest and to reap the similar benefits to citizenship, such as the tax and the asset protection that people want. But we also see opportunities for trickle-down economics, we see opportunities for jobs, we see opportunities for industry. And it really does give government the ability to govern, I would say, by being able to focus on bringing economics towards industries that they can use to basically full-power themselves and the vision for the nation as well. Too many Caribbean countries are centered around government being the number one employer, and I think it's time we build some industry beyond hospitality.
Let's take a look now at the economic and the geopolitical implications for nations reliant on the CBI inflows. You had mentioned briefly up front, but I think maybe you want to go a little bit more in depth into that now.
There's a third of government's revenue coming in, so we're going to see them be more independent, or more dependent, on IMF loans. We're going to see budgets that aren't balanced in the coming few years, and so I think there's a lot of countries that plan to use the funds that they have for quite big, large infrastructure. And I think it's less about planning for big infrastructure and better looking at how we can get efficiencies in government, and governments using those funds, like I said, to be able to grow industry, and perhaps looking at the CBI instead of just focused on building hotels, etc., that we start to look at how we can sustain the large businesses that we have, and perhaps using the foreign direct investment to further those industries so that we can compete on the global markets.
If you take a look at St. Kitts, for instance,
Sure.
The Prime Minister recently said that, look, we have to cut our dependency on the program, because he's seen what is happening in Europe, and he is seeing the unfolding in the US with their policy changes. So he knows something is coming down the pipeline. The question is, with the cutting inflows, wouldn't this have serious repercussions on the local economy in terms of jobs, payments for civil servants? Because they have built this around.
Yes, in the short term, yes, but these governments, like I can say in the case of Grenada, they were supposed to build reserves because we expect to have fluctuations in this. I think because of COVID, that was a bonus for us, and we saw a boom in the industry, but that isn't sustainable within itself. Governments have the funds now to be able to do something. Let's move those funds outside the Nostra accounts. Let's inject that into the economy. I think the Caribbean sometimes focuses too heavily on welfare and on grant, but instead, let's see what government can do through public-private partnerships. Let's see how we can get this going. We've got all of these citizens with expertise. Let's reach out to them and let's get them back on board so that we can grow.
We've been hearing about how much monies that governments have been collecting from these CBI programs.
Of course.
We've been hearing about the millions, and some people say the billions. Have populations really benefited?
So most of these funds are going to go on our debts. We've got historic debts to the IMF, etc. A lot of these things are their foreign currency, so the foreign balance will be used to pay for goods and services like the oil that we import and stuff like that by the government. So in all honesty, we also have to remember that the government has to behave in a certain way, and this is like high-level economics, in order to protect the peg, because we're all on the EC dollar.
Correct.
As well. And so we can't just speed up, which is M2, the flow of money, by doing a whole bunch of spending as well. There's unfortunately, there's genuine constraints that have to be there as well, and governments have to prepare. And to be honest with you, there also has to be a coordinated effort by these OECS states as well, and that's something that they're not doing at the moment.
You mentioned also in this article that the CBI industry must mature, or it will be dismantled from the outside. We're seeing the dismantlement right now.
Yes.
You said transparency is essential, and local
Yeah,
populations need to know that what CBI funds are being used for and see real outcomes.
exactly.
Otherwise, public trust erodes and resentment grows. No system can fully prevent bad actors. I think Chastanet was talking about the bad actors there, but governments can and must enforce consequences to protect the legitimacy of the program. So
Yeah.
the program really ineffectively is in its dying stages. Is that what we're seeing?
So I think what we're seeing, we could be seeing it in its dying stages, but another way I look at it is, like I said to you, to look back at previous programs, perhaps this just got too big. Perhaps the issue is it got too big, too quick, and that's what's unsustainable. If we look back at earlier iterations of it, it was far smaller amounts, far smaller amounts. And I think that's what it needs to be geared towards. It needs to be geared towards quality candidates that actually have something to offer.
What would be your approach to it now that it's in the stages where we are right now?
I would start to transition out. I would start to move away from this. I'd look at the funds that I'd have. I'd look at building special economic zones. I'll look at doing residency programs instead. I think sovereignty is key. Sovereignty is key. We can still develop our coastlines. We can still do the hotels, but we've got to put the people first. We've got to put our national interest first. We've got to put bilateral relations first. Because we're someone that we don't produce everything. We have to buy everything from Europe or the US. So we have to put that first in our interest. We have to use the funds that we've accumulated over time in order to build out our industry.
Some persons have said that in the case of St. Vincent, the opposition hoping to win the next election is saying once we get in, the CBI program is on its way. We're going to do it. And basically, you hear the spokesperson saying, well, look, Trump is offering the golden card. So what is wrong if we do CBI program? How different is the golden Trump card from the CBI program?
I mean, the price point is a huge difference as well. In order to be able to get into it as well, I don't see in any of the islands that we're able to offer the same level of concessions. If a wealthy person comes in looking to be able to build a business in the US, you've got hundreds of millions of skilled labor.
Correct.
This doesn't exist on the islands. Simply put, the persons that will be wanting to come onto such a program is because they want to launder money or they want to tie up their assets elsewhere outside of the jurisdiction that they're in. And I think ultimately the people that lose the most are the nationals. We're the ones that have the most to lose. We lose our access to be able to go on holidays to places, and we lose access to our land and our resources in the long run.
Another question, because you mentioned it earlier about losing lands.
Yes.
Go a bit further into that for me.
Wealthy individuals, we saw it during the pandemic within the UK. People ended up getting their monies. The poor people spent it and bought Gucci, and the wealthy bought houses and they bought land. And it's no different. Land is there. It's very affordable when you're in a foreign currency. They buy and they hold land, and guess what? We have no inheritance tax. So that land gets tied up with wealthy individuals. The local population gets priced out. And like I said, we become subservient within our home nations. It doesn't take long. It really doesn't take long. 5, 10 years, and it's a completely different landscape. And I think we need to wise up and wake up to that idea.
In terms of the U.S. visa policies,
Yeah.
the average person in the Caribbean, really, I mean, you may get a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, a policeman, they're working with the government, the civil service, they can go and get a visa because, and there may be some other persons outside of that domain, maybe a wealthy individual who owns a business and stuff, they can go and get a visa. But the average man who lives day to day in the Caribbean, many of them don't even have a passport. Plenty of them still don't even have passports. Some of them
Sure.
never had a visa, never went to the US. So who is this visa policy really affecting?
I mean, it's more than that. Again, I always say everything trickles down.
Okay.
Because if it becomes difficult for those people to be able to get to the US, some of the goods and services that we have, they'll no longer exist because the barriers to trade become higher. And so it becomes just that more difficult to do something very, very simple. And then that puts up prices domestically for everybody else as well. So it's about, we were working towards, I guess, a globalized society where frictionless trade was becoming more and more available. We've got some really exciting things in the Caribbean. We've got some of the lowest tariffs with the US. We need to take advantage of that relationship and build some trade with them as well and expand our own GDP.
But as we wrap things up here, What is the critical point now, the critical inflection point for the CBI program?
We
What
have
is
to
it?
put in controls. We've got to put in controls. We've got to put in quotas from particular countries. We've got to be careful about the dynamic that we're shaping here within the Caribbean. And we've got to get clean with things. We've got to be honest as countries and say when we've had bad actors. There's no one punishing us on the international stage for having bad actors. But for being dishonest, of course, that there will be serious friction and serious consequences.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being with me today, for giving me your insight on this topic that has become a real talking point in the Caribbean. You had mentioned that basically it's either we mature the industry or it will be dismantled. We need transparency in the industry, and politicians need to be honest with people as to how these funds are being used and who are the players involved. Is there anything else you would like to add to the discussion as we wrap it up?
No, I think that really sums up everything, to be honest with you, and the state of affairs for this industry.
All right. Thank you very much, Gerald Jules, Investment Manager and Socio-Economic Policy Advisor. Appreciate you being on the program today.
Thank you.